You're listening to The Good Morning Show with Oliver O.T. Thomas.
We're back. Welcome back to The Good Morning Show, WBOK 1230 a.m.
What New Orleans is talking
We
about.
want to thank all of our listeners, man. The lines have been lit up. Social media's been lit up all day. We want to thank Dr. Keith Ferdinand. Thank you, Dr. Ferdinand, for your service in medicine. I want to thank Chief Sean Ferguson's transparency, calling on us to aid and abet him and making sure that we're safe in our community. And as always, man, she's been one of our contributors here for the work that she does in terms of healing. We want to thank Dr. Denise Shervison. Doc, welcome back to the Good Morning Show.
Thank you, Oliver. It's always great to teach.
You're listening to The Good Morning Show with Oliver O.T. Thomas.
We're back. Welcome back to the Good Morning Show, WBOK 1230 a.m.
What New Orleans is talking
We
about.
want to thank all of our listeners, man. The lines have been lit up. Social media's been lit up all day. We want to thank Dr. Keith Ferdinand. Thank you, Dr. Ferdinand, for your service in medicine. I want to thank Chief Sean Ferguson's transparency, calling on us to aid and abet him and making sure that we're safe in our community. And as always, man, she's been one of our contributors here for the work that she does in terms of healing. We want to thank Dr. Denise Shervison. Doc, welcome back to the Good Morning Show.
Thank you, Oliver. It's always great to team up with you. I'm excited.
Well, man, we're not only excited, but given the conversation we've had around mental health, everything now, if the show could not have lined up better, from Dr. Ferguson, from Dr. Ferdinand to Chief Ferguson, now into this segment, the B-Sides Healing's Revolution. But first, before, how are you and how are your family and your loved ones? How are you guys faring during this time, Dr. Shervington?
I think we are faring or trying to fare like most people. We are faced with so much uncertainty, so much possibility of suffering, that I think I'm just trying, as the people in my community, and what I hope to share with more people today is how do we cope, because we're supposed to be feeling a little bit nervous and fearful about all that's going on right now in our lives.
Dr. Shervington, so much is centered around, all of a sudden, mental health is the focus. Remember several years ago throughout this country, mental health services were being cut. There was a conversation about our sanity versus other programs. Is the conversation and the funding, have they lined up yet, or is it still just a conversation, not the investment that it needs to be?
Yeah, we're not seeing the investments that we need. And I've been talking about this, say, from Katrina happened.
Yes.
You had such a severe death encounter for people, just everyone losing their city, losing their community, losing their way of being. And we did not make the proper investments in helping people sort through and manage psychologically how they were going to cope. And we were just hoping that, the usual resilience that we have shown in this country for over 400 years, somehow we were just going to tap back into that without any supports. Sometimes we need to be supported, and I think Corona is teaching us this lesson now. 1 in 5 people who've been infected with the virus are now showing signs of anxiety and depression. For those who haven't been infected, we're worried we could get infected. Many of us have had losses of loved ones. So if we don't invest in mental health now, I don't know when we're ever going to.
The B-Sides, guys, what already is soon to be one of the most popular podcasts. We're talking to Dr. Denise Shervington, Healing is a Revolution, the podcast. Doc, we know you start with a question, and as I'm looking at this information here, is that a question we ask ourselves? Or is that a question we ask the general public? What's on your mind? How have you been feeling? Have we gotten to the point where we need to look in the mirror and ask ourselves that question every day?
I think so. I think we need to ask ourselves that question. And then when we ask someone, like when you asked me how I was doing, rather than the usual I'm okay, we have to get really more genuine with ourselves and be more reflective to really understand what we're feeling. So then if it's making us feel anxious or depressed, we can develop the tools to feel better, to cope.
Yeah, I stopped asking people how they doing like that. I don't want to hear no bad news.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I just don't want to hear no.
I know some people like that now. They don't want to hear that.
I don't want to hear no bad news. Tell me something good. Lie to me.
Right.
I want to hear something positive. Yeah.
I want to deal with that, Dr. Shervington, because I have a very friend, someone who's close to me. You cannot tell them the realities of anything that's not right, especially right now. Now, we may think we're saving them, or they may think they're protecting themselves, but isn't that just as dangerous as the acknowledgement of what's going wrong or what you need to deal with?
As best I know, Oliver, and I know we've all used multiple defense mechanisms to get to where we are, so I want to acknowledge that. But what I see is when there is a breakdown, when those things, the way we delude ourselves, we tell ourselves the truth isn't the truth, the things that we're experiencing aren't real, this is when ultimately, if we continue that, you have to seek services with someone like myself. But there's so much the psyche and our physical bodies can tolerate us lying to ourselves. Because the truth is going to catch up with us at some point. And then we have not built the muscles to deal with things as they're happening.
We're talking to Dr. Denise Shervington, man. Our podcast, Healing is a Revolution. Doc, explain this revolution, how it plays out to Denise Shervington, especially around mental health and healing.
Okay. So the metaphor I use, and we all, the world, witnessed this. We saw one of the most overwhelming and frightening injuries that could ever happen to someone. We literally saw someone's life being drained out of them with a knee being put in their neck for 8 minutes, 46 seconds. When these things, we know as especially people of color, we've been having varying experiences like this throughout our enslavement. Throughout our enslavement. Let me leave it at that. There's injuries. If you have a knee in your neck, you're bound to have injury. And so an important part to me of healing is, of course, making sure that that knee goes away from our neck, but recognizing that because the knee is in our neck, we're going to have injury to our, the blood going up to our brain, to other places, the fear of seeing ourselves almost killed. And I'm using this as an extreme metaphor, but there are times when it wasn't so extreme. You think about enslaved people trying to run away, and if they got caught, they would be brought back and whipped to death. I mean, we've had these experiences throughout, as I say, our enslavement. And so part of the getting well is fixing these systems. Absolutely, we all should be fighting for that. But also healing ourselves. We've been injured. We've been damaged by the negativity, the lack of humanity that has been allotted to us. And I think we're going to have to sit quiet with that and figure out how individually we're going to heal ourselves and how we're going to help our collective to heal.
We're talking to Dr. Denise Shervington, one of the founders of one of the most revolutionary podcasts of this time. It's this important time, the B-Sides. Healing is a Revolution, the podcast. But we have a caller that's been holding because we wanted to set up the show and listen to you a minute. But before I go to the lines, Doc, you say something that, in terms of the podcast and its mission, you ask a question to people, and it would seem to me that the question would be obvious. Yes, so I'd like you to explain it. When you ask people, are they ready to heal? Well, surely people are ready to heal, right?
Yeah, I think we all want to heal, but sometimes we don't know how, or we're afraid that if we go back and deal with the things that hurt, we're going to feel more hurt. And again, one of the best metaphors I've heard, and this actually came from someone on season 1 in the podcast, is the only way out is through. And sometimes because we've been so burdened, we think that going through is going to be worse than what had happened. And the only thing I can say as a psychiatrist working for 30 years, it is never as bad to go back and understand how these things have harmed us and deflected our own ability to be true to ourselves. Is never as difficult to do that as what had actually happened. Because the past is the past, and we just need to kind of understand it so that we can figure out how to move forward.
Yeah,
we're not going to feel that pain as it had.
Yeah, having experienced therapy,
yeah,
I've seen the counselors, psychiatrists, psychologists. I gotta agree. I do agree.
Yeah.
With Dr. Shervington that understanding the past, because sometimes we misinterpreted the past. We misinterpreted what happened in the past, and we need somebody to explain, well, that's not exactly what occurred based on what you told them.
Right.
And it helps us to get a new perspective on our future, and we begin to see things in a different way. And so I think that you do have to go back and straighten out some things in your past in order to move forward and release. It's almost like a cleansing. And once you can accept those facts and correctly put them in a proper perspective, then you can make better decisions moving forward.
Now, Dr. Shervington, that's a perfect segue to my question. Then we're going to get to Miss Eloise. And Miss Eloise, thank you for holding. Dr. Shervington, you're not only saying that has to be personal, but you're saying that America and its systems and its institution needs to go back and have that level of cleansing also. You've said that for years. You've written about that. It has to be more than just, especially black folk, African Americans, saying it's an individual cleansing or healing. It has to be a national healing?
Totally. And just think about the person who puts the knee in your neck. Just think about how absolutely missing they are of, we want to call it a soul or a psyche. I can only imagine how damaged that person is, and they need to heal. They need to understand why their only sense of being okay is by overpowering and dominating other people. Why, in order for them to feel good about themselves, they have to make other people feel badly. So, yeah, it's all of us that need healing, the perpetrators and the survivors.
Miss Eloise, thank you for holding so much, Miss Eloise. You're on with Dr. Denise Shervington.
Yeah, hello?
Yes, Miss Eloise, you're on the air.
Yes, I'm Dr. What's her name?
Dr. Shervington.
Dr. Shervington.
Hi.
I never heard you before, but there was a gentleman that was on TV, on the radio pretty much, but I can't think his name right now, that I had put a question to. I'm a multiple victim of homicide, which I never got justice for either one of my family members. And I was told by an officer that brought this up to me at my house why they couldn't arrest this young man that did that shooting of my son. He told me that he couldn't do this young man, they couldn't do this young man anything unless he do something else. So I asked, well, what would my son's life meant to anybody? This young man just could shoot him, and they took him off for some hours on hours, and nobody knew where he was until the next day, and the newspaper brought out the story about where nobody knew where Mark Lewis Williams was for hours on hours. It had to come through the newspaper because nobody else could tell me nothing. Either officers that moved the unit couldn't tell what they wasn't asking them anything. So I began to go do my own researching, but everybody looking at me now like, are you crazy? What like I'm coming across to them like I'm crazy, but I got questions. I got things that need to be answered. So do I have to be crazy to ask for some closure to what didn't happen to me? Or since you're the psychiatrist, because I spoke to psychiatrists and psychology and all of these people, but no one can give me a definite answer as a mother who needs some closure, who you wrote in the paper about. Well, we had 2 hospitals at that time. My son was not at Joel and Smith. He was not at Charity Hospital. Miss Blackburn, Nancy Blackburn, who was the Time-Picayune writer, wrote up in the paper there was no one brought into Charity Hospital by the name of Mark Lewis Williams. You know, when I see that, and when I hear people, trying to criticize, I have to ask questions. Am I supposed to be crazy for asking questions? I lost my sister. I lost my 9-year-old grandson. I lost my grandmother who was 80 years old. They went in her house and tore her head off. I missed my sister, who they tore her face off.
Thank you, Ms. Eloise.
This showed me, Thomas, this showed me hate. I don't care who don't like me.
Yes, ma'am.
I want this lady to tell me.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. What,
Eloise?
Thank you, Ms. Eloise. We just COVID-19 uncertainty in terms of our economy right now. We're going to lose so many jobs. The police chief, we just talked about the report the other day with Dr. Penny that said homicides are up 87%, arrests down 60%, assaults and burglaries up 73%. There are a lot of Miss Eloise's out there that need some healing, Dr. Shervington.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say to Miss Eloise that the loss of a child is almost unimaginable for most people, and then to have that child taken away in a brutal way is even more difficult.
She's lost both of her sons.
Yes, I have worked with mothers who have lost their children. It's a very painful journey. It's extreme loss. It's extreme grief. And ultimately, the healing is when one can hold those two, hold the pain, but also know that if one is continuing to live, one has to find ways to be joyful and okay again. And it's not going to go away. That hole in the heart, the loss is going to be there. But it's how can you hold that and know that there is a new way, a new wholeness that you can achieve, even in spite of that space of pain. And, the time, it takes a different time frame for people. It depends on all that has happened before. It depends on who turns up for you and supports you. So, I can't say you should get over it in a year or 10 years, but one has to, the healing journey is finding a way to hold the pain and not feeling overwhelmed by it, and knowing that it will be there, but knowing there are other spaces in one's life where there's joy and there's happiness.
We're talking to Dr. Denise Shervington. She's the president of IWEST Institute of Women and Ethnic Studies. She's the chair of psychiatry at the Charles Drew University of Medicine and Science. Her podcast, The B Series, Healing is the Revolution, one of the most profound podcasts on mental health and healing that this country has ever seen. Doc, I'm always, famous quotes by famous people. Injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. Well, you basically have said that phrase applies to mental health. No one is well until we're all well?
Yes.
How is that even possible?
I think we can all move towards being well. I mean, let's think back, in March for most people, it was around the beginning of the middle of March, we began to recognize that there is this extreme threat to all our lives and livelihood. Mm-hmm. I would like to think that what we are beginning to do is have a different sense as who we are as human beings living with each other. You know, I always say it's so much easier to be loving and than it is to be hateful and mean-spirited. And so, like a lot of the suffering that we experience, I think, is because we will not reflect and deal with the challenges that we feel, the conflicts we have, and recognize that this is a part of life. And if we can face life with good intentions for ourselves and each other, I think we can heal. I think we can do better as human beings. And if enough of us show up wanting to be better, starting with our minds, you know, the mind shapes the whole way we're going to experience life. We have the physical body that moves us through the experience. We can't live without it, but a lot of what we think of as the mind or psyche is what creates the experience that we're having of this journey through life. And I think the challenge we have is, can each one of us as human beings try to turn up in the best version of ourselves, recognizing that we have the capacity to do a lot of evil, and we see a lot of evil around us. But I think we have the capacity to make the choice to not be like that, to pay attention to the parts of us that are hateful and greedy, and we all have it, I have it. But pay attention and make a decision. Is that the best way to journey through life? Isn't it easier to be a little better in terms of a little more loving, a little more giving? And if we all, enough of us could turn up like this, I think we could have a far better experience of life and society as a whole.
Equity Media and WBUK and the Good Morning Show have partnered with Dr. Denise Shervington. She is the president of iWest Institute of Women and Ethnic Studies and the chair of psychiatry at the Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science. And a revolutionary podcast, the B-Side series, will be partnering for the next several weeks. You want to tune in, weigh in, and you definitely want to support the podcast. Miss Cheryl, you're on with Dr. Shervington.
Hello, how y'all doing today?
We're doing fine, Miss Cheryl.
Thanks for having the doctor on. Every holiday that comes up, which is Halloween for me, is when my son was murdered before his 21st birthday in a Fisher Project before he tore it down. To this day, it's an unsolved murder. You know, he was at the wrong place at the wrong time going to his girlfriend. He got accused of doing something to somebody out in East New Orleans, but he didn't have nothing to do with it. It was somebody else. So the guy said, you know, they didn't took care of the dude. You know, he walking around with a urine bag and a poop bag, you know, but I don't know if he's still alive. But in the meantime, during the DA, they called me up to come into the office, and I'm like, I'm not one of those mothers that's going to scream and holler and act a fool. I just want you to do your job. And they didn't do their job, okay? So there's a thing that's going on with a lot of mothers that lost kids that shouldn't have been gone. This kid had a life that was going to be beautiful for him. He fell out a 2-story window, so he had plenty of money. Boy had $250,000. He ain't had nothing to lose. You know, for them to take that, you know, and then when he dies, his father comes in with all his other children. They snatch it all away from the family that knew him all the time. But the system doesn't work for people that lose things, especially family members, and it drives me. And I just hope and pray that someone can make things better.
Thank you,
and have
Cheryl.
Closure for these families.
Thank you.
Y'all have a blessed day and stay safe.
Thank you. Closure, make things better, better as human beings. Jomo, God bless, man. You're on with Dr. Shervington. Brother Jomo.
Good morning, man. I appreciate the doctor because that's the approach we need to take. We really have to look at our people with empathy and with love. And I'm saying that when we're talking about crime. And I know we have some people who need to be dealt with. Mm-hmm. But as a people, our behavior was actually planned and predicted. I mean, the way we behaving is the natural way because of the conditions and situations we were put in by a group who benefit off our suffering and dysfunction for real.
Yeah.
So that's why we really do have to always ask ourselves how, why, and the who, like Professor said. And when you do that, you really go to the history and the root of things, because we really have been, our families, our culture, our community really has been attacked and it's been destroyed. So here's an example. After the storm, if you were in a Superdome and you pulled out a Snicker bar, your life was in danger. Because you're in a room full of people who had not eaten, who had not had water.
Yes.
So I have to survive. So there are things that over centuries we have learned to do. And when the prop talk about generations, families doing things, yes, we have developed certain ways, families doing things. And when you think about it closely and really listen to what I'm saying, it's a form of intelligence. It might not be the right way, but it's a way that I'm going to figure out to survive. So when you have these families who teach things, like when you go to jail, it's different rules.
Yes.
So they have things that you have to do in that place. So if I just went to certain schools and my people, middle class, you have to understand all our people not like that. So let's look at our people with love, because there's really, for centuries, and we can look at the history. So it's really not conspiracy like Prof said. We can prove certain things that happen, but look at our people with love and empathy, because we are sick. We have been traumatized, and we still are being traumatized.
Thank you, Joe.
Anytime I could be on a corner and watch the police put his knee on somebody's neck, and I watch the life leave their body, why wouldn't that traumatize me? Why wouldn't I behave in a certain way? It's been predicted and planned by others. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Better as human beings. I think that's the challenge and the charge we've gotten. We're talking to Dr. Denise Shervington. She is the creator and founder of the B-Sides. Healing is a Revolution, a podcast that's going to take this country, hopefully this world, this nation, by storm. Dr. Shervington, I cannot have you on this show without asking you about a phrase that you are famous for, not just in the field of psychiatry and psychology, but people are using it. I use it now in my talks and in everyday life. In terms of our children, Prof, she coined the phrase sad, not bad. Expound, please, Dr. Shervington, especially based on the comments that Jomo just made.
Yeah, and two mothers called in, they have lost their children to violence. And before I get to that, I just would recommend that folks listen to an amazing person who had such an experience several years ago on the podcast, and he talked about healing. He lost his son to a lot of violence. And so why I think that's important is, as the last gentleman said, with all the adversities we've had, the attempts to dehumanize us, to make us feel lesser than, unfortunately, many of us have internalized self-hatred. The idea that children, and I'm calling them children because they are our children, can get into conflict with each other and they reach for a gun and they go and they take someone else's life. Something very, very wrong has happened to us. And I think that what has happened is because we're not dealing with our sadness. I have worked with the perpetrators of this violence, as I worked with the survivors and victims. You can't tell the difference in terms of trauma. Though seeming kids who are being bad and aggressive and violent, they have had so much pain in their lives. Many of them were victims to early childhood maltreatment, and no one did anything about it. And the only thing they knew to do was to act as violently as what was done to them. So these are kids who are really sad, deeply disturbed and hurt. And if we want to get a hold of, this violence that we're seeing, we're going to have to recognize with compassion that the perpetrators of these acts, they're really, really hurt inside, emotionally dysregulated. And the only option in the moment they see is to protect themselves from their perceived harm. And so I think if we were to flip and see that the children, especially the ones that we label as bad and criminals, that they are in need of a lot of support, psychological help. I have someone on the podcast who talked about witnessing violence, all seeing someone killed right in front of him. And when he told his mother what happened, she said, "It's okay, son, you'll get over it. It happens all the time." No. When he was a child and when he was, I think it happened when he was 11 or 12, he needed to go talk to someone and talk about how frightened he was. Lucky, he had great coping skills. He went to prison because of drugs, and he came out and he found a way to cope and dig deep, and now he's a teacher. So these are the stories of resilience and hope that we talk about on the podcast, how people find a way to heal.
How can people listen? Yeah. We're coming to the end of the segment. First of all, man, people are just raving on social media. You're making a difference. How can people listen to the podcast? Where do they get it at, Dr. Shervington?
They get it wherever, we find our podcast, right. Apple, Spotify, Google. Right. It's on our website. And the importance of this podcast to me is that I think we have the capacity to heal. If we could, each one of us, especially people, I'm talking to us black people, I can only deal with the healing of black people. White people are going to have to deal with their own healing. But if we can recognize that by going inward, spending a little more time in quietude, understanding our hurt and our pain, that through that we can find a way to cope and be happier, to feel better. If we can do this, we will be far ahead. I worry about us always, and my friends always say that to me, almost as if I'm being negative, but it's not. I see the pathology, I see the pain, but I know we are resilient, we can come through, and this is what healing is, the revolution is. Certainly our ancestors came through enough for us, and we've got to come through for the future generation. We cannot allow all the suffering that we're experiencing right now to take us out. We can get through it. We can learn to cope. But part of coping is, one, beginning to acknowledge we're hurting, and then being quiet enough to get the supports, either with a therapist. Mental health treatment is amazing, and I know we've had bad experiences because of what happens when the system has tried to criminalize us for our mental health disorders. But there are multiple other places we go. We have friends. For some people, it's their faith, whatever it is. But it has to be, whatever we're doing, we have to touch that pain. We have to understand it. We have to understand how it's impacted us. And we have to dig deep to figure out how we're going to cope. Either get someone who's trained to teach us how to build our coping skills, or as some people do, depend on our friends or good friends, depend on the nature around us, depend on music. All these things we can do to heal ourselves, and we need to do so.
Dr. Denise Shervington, president of iWest Institute of Women and Ethnic Studies, chair of psychiatry, Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science. The B-Side series, Healing is a Revolution, the podcast, in partnership with Equity Media and WBOK in the Good Morning Show. Folk want to know, is there a number where you can be reached at iWest or at your profession, Dr. Shervington?
Folks can always go on the website. We have a system of people can send us inquiries or questions. And, I just challenge everyone to recognize that whatever pain there is, they can get through it, and to be committed to their own self-care, their own wellness, and also to support that of the people around them.
Someone just asked, they said when you come back, they wanted you to explain what the B means in B-sides. We'll ask that question the next time Dr. Shervington comes back. Prof, what a great show, man.
Yeah.
You feel better already, don't
Therapeutic.
you? You feel better already. We had a wonderful show. We want to thank Dr. Shervington. Can't wait till our next series. And look, this podcast is going to make a difference. Make sure we support it. And you don't have to leave the Good Morning Show, man. You can stay on the neutral ground with Kelda and Graylan. We'll be back tomorrow. Can't wait till Hump Day. Y'all have a wonderful day.